The galaxy is vast, but news travels fast, carried on the hyperspace lanes like pollen on the wind. For 2 long years, the news had been a monotonous dirge of casualty reports and shifting front lines. But now, a new story was being told. It was a story whispered in the barracks of besieged outposts and transmitted in coded bursts between clone legions. It was the story of the Vanguard, the legion that had forgotten how to die. Where other battalions reported losses in the dozens, the 501th reported victories with injuries that could be patched in the medbay. They moved like shadows, struck like lightning, and valued the life of the trooper over the capture of a worthless rock. And at their heart was the impossible anomaly, a commander with no connection to the Force, who led with a simple shield and an unshakable conviction that the men under his command were not expendable. On the frozen plains of Mygeeto, this new legend was being written in the snow. A blizzard raged, a wall of white that grounded air support and froze targeting sensors. For the Separatist droids guarding the primary energy converter, it was a welcome respite. For the 501th, it was perfect cover. Echo Team, status. Steve Rogers' voice was a calm, low murmur over the squad comms, cutting through the howl of the wind. He lay flat on a ridge of blue ice, his blue uniform a stark contrast to the white snow, but his movements were so minimal he was practically invisible. In position, Captain, ARC Trooper 5's replied, his own voice a whisper. We have eyes on the thermal exhaust port, no sentries. They're getting lazy in the cold. They're machines, 5's, Jesse chimed in from the opposite ridge. They don't get lazy, they get overconfident. Steve smiled beneath his cowl. Good, we punish overconfidence. He looked down at the sprawling Separatist facility, a black stain on the pristine landscape. The old way, the Jedi way, would have been a frontal assault with ATT walkers, a costly, noisy affair. Steve's plan was more like surgery. Rex, your team is green, Steve commanded. Below, almost undetectable against the ice, 3 fire teams began to move. They weren't marching in formation. They bounded from cover to cover, white camo cloaks fluttering over their blue-marked armor. On each of their helmets, the red stripes and white star were a silent declaration of who they were. They were the Vanguard. All right, Steve said, adjusting his grip on his shield. Let's knock the power out. On my mark. He didn't wait for the battle to come to him. He slid down the ice ridge on his back, using his shield like a sled to control his descent. He landed silently at the base of the facility wall, a ghost in the storm. Mark. A single muffled shot echoed from 5's position. The thermal exhaust port, a small, overlooked weakness, sparked and erupted. Inside the facility, lights flickered. Alarms, muffled by the Durasteel walls, began to blare. As the droids scrambled in confusion, Rex's teams planted thermal charges on the primary leg supports of the converter. All charges set, Rex reported. Ready for the fireworks, Captain. Pull back to the extraction point, Steve ordered. I'll keep them busy. A blast door hissed open, and a platoon of B-1 battle droids spilled out, their flashlights cutting uselessly through the blizzard. Find them, find the intruders, a droid commander squawked. It found Steve. He stepped out of the swirling snow, a lone figure against the blizzard. Looking for me. The droids swiveled, their photoreceptors glowing red. They opened fire. Red plasma bolts vanished into the whiteout. Steve met them with a shield, the impacts hissing as they vaporized the snowflakes. He charged forward, a force of nature as unstoppable as the storm around him. He dismantled the squad with brutal efficiency, the clang of vibranium against droid steel the only sound besides the wind. By the time the super battle droids arrived, he was gone, vanished back into the blizzard. And as he scaled the ice wall to rejoin his men, Rex hit the detonator. A series of deep, booming explosions tore the facility apart from the inside out, a victory won not with overwhelming force, but with precision, stealth, and not a single life lost. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. May the Force be with you. This new doctrine was infectious. On Renvar, clone troopers under Commander Cody were spotted using Rogers' bounding overwatch technique. On Cato Neomoidia, Commander Wolf's 104th Battalion began painting small gray stars on their helmets, a quiet nod of solidarity. The Rogers effect, as disgruntled traditionalist officers called it, was spreading. The clones were becoming more effective, more independent, and more defiant. And the Jedi Council was growing nervous. Undeniable, he said. Obi-Wan Kenobi argued, his holographic form flickers in the Jedi Council chamber. The war machine of the Republic was fueled by more than just Hibana gas and clone rations. It ran on information. Reports, requisitions, and battlefield intelligence flowed in a constant stream back to the galactic core, where they were processed, analyzed, and often manipulated. It was in this river of data that Chancellor Palpatine began his silent, insidious campaign against Captain America. He did not use a blaster or a lightsaber. He used whispers. His first target was the Senate. In a private briefing with a handful of influential loyalists, including the Honorable Bail Organa of Alderaan, Palpatine projected an image of grave concern. The victories achieved by the 501 under Commander Rogers' advisory are, of course, a blessing, Palpatine began, his voice a soothing balm of fatherly wisdom. He stood before a large viewport, the endless traffic of Coruscant, a glittering tapestry behind him. He is a true hero, a man of the people, for the people. It is precisely this quality that gives me pause. The senators exchanged confused glances. Chancellor? Bail Organa prompted, his brow furrowed. I don't understand. His effectiveness is saving lives and resources. Indeed, Senator, and we are all grateful. Palpatine turned, clasping his hands. But consider the nature of his influence. The incident with Admiral Tarkin, for example. We painted it as a communications error, but we in this room know the truth. A military commander, a foreign one at that, incited a legion to defy the lawful authority of the Republic Navy. He was, in his mind, morally correct, but is moral correctness a valid defense for military insubordination? He let the question hang in the air. The senators shifted uncomfortably. And now we see this vanguard phenomenon, Palpatine continued, gesturing to a datapad that displayed images of clone helmets with the new star and stripes markings. A touching display of unit pride on the surface, but these markings are not regulation. They are a personal sigil of loyalty, not to the Republic, but to a single man. When an army begins to swear fealty to its general instead of the state, history teaches us that the road ahead is a dark one. He sighed, a masterful performance of a leader burdened by foresight. I am not accusing the captain of ambition. I believe his heart is pure. But his charisma, his connection to the common soldier, it is a power greater than any fleet. And unlike the Jedi, whose power is tempered by millennia of discipline and loyalty to this body, Captain Rogers answers only to his own conscience. I worry, my friends. I worry for the stability of the Grand Army and for the future of our democracy when the war is over. He had planted the seed. The senators left the meeting not with orders, but with a shared, creeping sense of dread. The hero they had been celebrating now seemed like a potential threat, a beloved general on the verge of becoming a warlord. His second conversation was more direct and far more potent. He summoned Jedi Master Mace Windu to his office under the guise of seeking counsel. Master Windu, Palpatine said, his voice somber, I value the Jedi's perspective on matters of a spiritual nature, and there is a spirit growing in our army that troubles me. You are referring to Captain Rogers, Windu stated, his face impassive. I am, Palpatine nodded gravely. I have reviewed the reports. He has turned the 501 into the most effective fighting force in the galaxy, but he has done so by systematically dismantling the very principles of obedience upon which the clone army was founded. He slid a datapad across the desk. This is a report from the Felucia campaign. General Sakura requested reinforcements for a critical push. The 212th Legion, citing Commander Rogers' casualty-averse doctrine, hesitated to engage a fortified position. They questioned a direct order from their Jedi general. Windu's jaw tightened. This was a direct affront to the Jedi's authority. Rogers' philosophy is one of absolutes, Palpatine continued, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. But you and I, Master Jedi, know that the galaxy is a complex tapestry of gray. A general must sometimes make the difficult choice to sacrifice the few to save the many. Rogers has taught the clones that no sacrifice is acceptable. He is teaching them to value their own lives above the strategic needs of the Republic. He is interfering with their programming, Windu said, his voice hard. Precisely, Palpatine seized on the phrase. He is an outsider, a biological and philosophical anomaly. We cannot sense his intentions through the Force. He operates outside our understanding. Tell me, Master Windu, what happens when a man who cannot be reasoned with, who answers to no authority but his own, gains the unthinking loyalty of 1,000,000 soldiers? The Jedi Order itself could be threatened. Mace Windu stood. His mind was made up. He had been wary of the captain's influence, but Palpatine had given his fears a name and a shape.
Rogers wasn't just a disruption, he was a potential schismatic, a threat to the stability of both the Republic and the Jedi Order. "I thank you for your candor, Chancellor," Windu said with a stiff bow. "The Council will monitor the situation closely." The poison was now in the water supply. Within days, the effects were felt. Anakin's requests for advanced munitions for the 501 were mysteriously delayed by Senate oversight committees. Obi-Wan found himself feeling pointed questions from his fellow council members about his association with the rogue commander. The HoloNet, once filled with heroic tales of the shield-bearer of the Republic, began to run subtle counter-narratives. Pundits questioned the wisdom of placing so much trust in a foreigner. Retired admirals spoke of the dangers of insubordination. Miles away, on the front lines, Steve Rogers knew nothing of the political war being waged against him. He was focused on his men, on the next battle, on keeping them alive. He was utterly unaware that as he fought the enemy in front of him, the ground was being cut away from beneath his feet. He had faced down tyrants and monsters, but he was utterly unprepared for the battle of perception. And as the whispers grew to a murmur, and the murmur grew to a chorus of suspicion, the stage was being set for his fall.
Section 3. Kamino was a world of eternal verticality and oppressive rhythm. The torrential rains hammered against the sleek, white domes of Topakasini with a sound like millions of frantic drumsticks, while the churning, dark waters of the planetary ocean below provided a deep, subsonic bass. Inside the facility, the atmosphere was the opposite, sterile, silent, and illuminated by a flat, white light that stripped away shadows. ARC Trooper 5s hated it. Since serving under Captain Rogers, he had grown accustomed to the chaotic, vibrant colors of the front, the red dust of Geonosis, the neon jungles of Felucia, even the grimy gray of Coruscant's lower levels. Kamino felt like a tomb where the residents didn't know they were dead yet. He was there on a rotational oversight assignment, a role Steve had fought to establish. Rogers believed that veteran clones should have a say in the training and welfare of the shinies coming out of the tubes. The data remains inconsistent, ARC 5555, Nalisay, the chief scientist, said, with her characteristically cool, detached tone. Her long, elegant neck swayed as she moved between holographic displays. "It is unnecessary. We pride ourselves on the predictability of our product." "They're not products, ma'am. They're soldiers," Fives corrected, his voice tight. He leaned against the cold durasteel wall of the gestation lab. Thousands of translucent pods stretched into the distance, each containing a developing brother. "And Captain Rogers says lateral thinking is what keeps a man alive when the plan falls apart." Nalisay's large, dark eyes blinked slowly. "The captain's influence is noted, and, as we are seeing, increasingly problematic." Before Fives could respond, a shrill, piercing alarm cut through the sterile quiet. It wasn't the standard drill tone. This was a Level 5 bio-containment breach. "Sector 4, Gestation Chamber 12, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Explosion in the primary nutrient feed. We have a catastrophic pressure drop." Fives was moving before the announcement finished. He sprinted down the pristine corridors, his boots squeaking against the polished floors. Sector 4 was the heart of the newest production cycle, the first batch designed under the Republic's new Accelerated Necessity Guidelines. He rounded the corner to Chamber 12 and was met with a wall of white vapor and the acrid smell of ozone and burnt chemicals. The blast doors had been blown outward, twisted like scrap metal. Inside, the scene was a nightmare. Hundreds of gestation pods had shattered, their precious contents spilled across the floor in a slurry of nutrient fluid and shattered glass. "Seal the vents," Fives roared to the terrified maintenance droids. Medics. We need medics here now." He waded into the debris, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw a pod that was still intact, but losing pressure. He slammed his hand against the manual override, trying to stabilize the life support. "Fives, get back!" He turned to see Jedi Master Shaak Ti sprinting toward him, her lightsaber ignited, though there was no enemy to strike. She looked at the devastation, her serene face masked with horror. "What happened?" "I don't know, General. I heard the alarm and—" "Stop right there, ARC 5555. A squad of Kamino and security droids glided into the room, their weapons leveled at Fives. Behind them walked Nalisay, her expression unreadable. "The terminal logs are quite clear," Nalisay said, her voice echoing in the ruined chamber. "Your authorization code was used to override the pressure regulators 3 minutes before the blast, and security footage shows a figure in ARC Trooper armor exiting the sub-level maintenance hatch moments ago."
Fives stared at her, his mouth hanging open. "That's impossible. I was in the observation lounge with you." "I stepped away for 5 minutes to confer with the Prime Minister," Nalase replied smoothly, "during which time you were unaccounted for. You have been vocal about your disdain for the accelerated batches, Trooper. You called them biological droids just this morning." "I would never hurt my brothers," Fives shouted, his hand drifting toward his blaster. "Don't," Shakti said softly, her hand reaching out. She looked troubled, her force senses clouded by the sudden, sharp spike of grief and chaos in the room. "Fives, if you are innocent, we will find the truth. But right now, you must stand down." "General, this is a setup," Fives pleaded. "Look at the blast marks. This wasn't a regulator failure. This was a demolition charge." "A charge likely provided by your Vanguard contacts," Nalase interjected. "We have found encrypted communications on your personal datapad linking you to a dissident group within the 501. They speak of ending the production of slaves." Fives felt the floor fall out from under him. The trap was perfect. He was the most prominent clone in the Vanguard, the most outspoken supporter of Roger's philosophy. By framing him for the murder of his own unborn brothers, they weren't just destroying him, they were poisoning the very idea of clone independence. Hours later, the news reached the Resolute, currently in orbit over the shipyards of Kuukt. Steve was in the middle of a tactical briefing with Rex and Anakin when the holoprojector flickered to life. It wasn't Obi-Wan or the Council, it was Chancellor Palpatine. "Captain Rogers," Palpatine said, his face a mask of profound sorrow. "I'm afraid I have grave news. There has been a tragedy on Kamino, an act of unthinkable sabotage." Steve stood straight, his stomach nodding. "Report, Chancellor." "A massive explosion in the gestation facilities. Thousands of lives lost." Palpatine paused, letting the weight of the number sink in. "The suspect is in custody. It is ARC Trooper Fives. He claimed he was acting on your behalf, Captain, to liberate his brothers from a life of servitude." The silence in the briefing room was absolute. Rex looked like he had been struck in the face. Anakin's jaw dropped. "That's a lie," Steve said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Fives would never do that, and he certainly wouldn't do it in my name." "The evidence is overwhelming, Captain," Palpatine sighed. "The Senate is in an uproar. They see this Vanguard movement not as a group of heroes, but as a cell of radicals. I have been forced to sign an executive order. The 501 is to be grounded immediately. All Vanguard markings are to be removed from armor. And you, Captain," Palpatine looked directly at Steve through the hololight of the hologram, "you are ordered to return to Coruscant to face a closed-door tribunal. Until then, you are relieved of your command. Captain Rex will be placed under the supervision of the Coruscant Guard for debriefing." "Rex is my officer," Steve snapped, "and Fives is my soldier. I'm going to Kamino." "If you do, you will be declared a deserter and an enemy of the Republic," Palpatine said softly. "The Jedi Council has already authorized Master Windu to intercept you if you deviate from your flight path to Coruscant." The hologram flickered and died. Steve looked at Rex. He saw the doubt, the fear, and the absolute loyalty warring in the captain's eyes. He saw Anakin, his friend, looking at him with a mixture of confusion and burgeoning anger. "Steve," Anakin said quietly, "if Fives did this—" "He didn't," Steve said, clipping his shield to his back. The vibranium felt heavier than usual. He looked at the door, then back at Rex. "I'm not going to Coruscant, and I'm not going to Kamino as a prisoner. Rex, tell the men to prep for a cold start. We're going off-grid." "Sir," Rex said, his voice shaking, "if we do this, there's no coming back. We'll be outlaws." Steve Rogers, the man who had always been the ultimate soldier, the man who had been the face of the Republic's hope, looked at his friend with a grim, determined smile. "I've been an outlaw before, Rex. It's better than being a puppet."
Coruscant had always been a city of two faces, but as the stolen civilian freighter Lothal Dream descended through the thick, smog-heavy clouds of the industrial district, Steve Rogers saw only the mask of a predator. The glittering spires of the Senate and the Jedi Temple were far above them now, distant needles of light piercing a sky they no longer belonged to. Below, the city swallowed the sun, replaced by the harsh, flickering neon of the lower levels, a subterranean world of shadow, steam, and the low, oppressive thrum of billions of lives trapped in a Durasteel hive. "Keep the signature low, Rex," Steve said, his voice steady despite the weight of the galaxy pressing down on them. He was hunched over the co-pilot seat, his eyes scanning the cluttered holographic radar.
"I'm ghosting the transponder, sir," Rex replied, his hands moving over the controls with practiced mechanical precision. He wasn't wearing his helmet. His face was pale, his jaw set in a hard line. He had left behind his legion, his brothers, and his standing in the only life he had ever known. He was, by every definition of Republic law, a deserter. But Anakin, he'll know. He knows my flight patterns. He'll guess where we're going. "Let's hope his heart is still arguing with his orders," Steve murmured. The escape from the Resolute had been a blur of high-stakes tension. Anakin had met them at the hangar, his lightsaber unclipped but not ignited, his blue eyes burning with a mixture of betrayal and desperation. He had pleaded with Steve to trust the system, to let the Council handle fives. Steve had looked his friend in the eye and told him that a system that framed its own heroes wasn't a system worth trusting. In the end, Anakin hadn't moved to stop them, but the silence he left in his wake felt like a death knell for their friendship. The freighter shuddered as it entered the atmospheric wake of a massive garbage hauler, the smell of ozone and rotting waste seeping through the aging seals of the cockpit. They were headed for level 1313, the notorious heart of the Coruscant underworld, where the reach of the Senate was short and the memory of the law was shorter. "We need a safe house and a terminal," Steve said, grabbing his shield from the floor and strapping it to his back. The familiar weight was a comfort in the alien gloom. If Nala Say framed fives, the evidence is on Kamino, but the orders came from here. Someone on Coruscant authorized that accelerated necessity batch. We find the paper trail, we find the architect. They set the ship down in a crumbling automated bay that smelled of stale grease and ancient coolant. As the ramp lowered, the sounds of the lower levels rushed in, a cacophony of alien tongues, the screech of rusted repulsor lifts, and the distant rhythmic pounding of heavy machinery. It was a world that didn't care about the Clone Wars or the fate of a Republic hero. Rex stepped out into the humid, hazy air, a heavy gray cloak draped over his armor to hide the distinctive blue markings of the 501st. "I've spent my life fighting for this city," he whispered, looking up at the layers of metal and light stacked miles deep above them. "I never thought I'd be hiding in its gutters." "The gutters are where you see what a building is really made of, Rex," Steve said, pulling his own hood low. They hadn't walked 3 blocks before the hunt began. The sound of boots, synchronized, heavy, and unmistakable, echoed off the damp alley walls. Steve grabbed Rex's shoulder, pulling him into the alcove of a shuttered droid repair shop. A squad of Coruscant Guard shock troopers marched past, their red-marked armor gleaming under the flickering streetlights. They weren't patrolling for criminals. They were moving in a search grid pattern, their DC-15S carbines raised and ready. "They're not just looking for us," Rex said, checking his own sidearm. "They're sweeping the sector. Tarkin must have mobilized the entire guard." "Commander Fox," noted Steve, watching the squad leader signal his men. "He's a good soldier. That makes him dangerous. He won't stop until he has a target." "What's the play, Captain?" Steve scanned the environment with the tactical fluidity of a man who had fought in a dozen cities under a dozen different regimes. He saw a series of steam pipes venting from a power substation 20 yards ahead. Above them, a web of rusted catwalks and cargo rails crisscrossed the narrow canyon of the street. "We can't shoot our way out, Rex. Those are your brothers," Steve said firmly. "We move through the heights. If they spot us, I draw the fire. You get to the info broker we discussed." "Sir, I'm not leaving you." "That's an order, Captain," Steve said, his blue eyes flashing with the command presence that had led the Howling Commandos. "Find the informant. I'll meet you at the extraction point in 1 hour. Go." Rex hesitated, then nodded, vanishing into the shadows of a ventilation shaft. Steve stepped out of the alcove, purposefully letting the heel of his boot strike the metal plating of the street. The sound echoed. "Target sighted, Sector 7-4, a trooper roared. The red-armored clone swiveled as one. "Halt. Drop the shield and surrender, Rogers." Steve didn't halt. He sprinted towards the power substation, the super soldier serum pushing his heart into high gear. Red stun bolts rained down around him, sizzling against the wet pavement. He didn't fire back. He leaped, catching the edge of a dangling cargo crane, swinging himself upward with an effortless display of strength that drew gasps from the troopers below. "Don't let him get to the catwalks. Set blasters to stun, full spread," Fox's voice boomed over the comms. Steve unslung the shield midair. He landed on a rusted rail, the metal groaning under his weight, and immediately brought the vibranium up. A wall of blue circles, stun rings, slammed into the star. The shield hummed, the vibranium absorbing the kinetic energy and vibrating with a low harmonic resonance that Steve felt in his very marrow. He didn't retreat. He charged forward along the narrow rail. 3 troopers were waiting at the end of the line, their weapons raised. Steve dived into a roll, the shield held tight against his chest. He came up under their guard. His movements were a blur of calculated efficiency. He didn't use the edge of the shield to cut. He used the flat of it to push. He struck the first trooper's chest plate, the kinetic force sending the man sliding back 5 feet into his comrades. Steve followed up with a sweeping kick that knocked their legs out from under them, and before they could recover, he had vaulted over the railing and onto a lower level's roof. "He's too fast," a trooper yelled. "We can't pin him down." Steve paused for a fraction of a second on the edge of the roof, looking back at the red-armored men. He saw their discipline, their bravery, and the tragedy of their situation.
They were being used as bloodhounds to hunt the man who wanted to set them free. "Sorry, fellas," he whispered to himself. "I can do this all day, but I've got a friend to save." He turned and leaped into the abyss of a trash chute, disappearing into the dark, steam-filled bowels of level 1313. Behind him, the sound of Fox's frustrated commands faded, replaced by the deep, lonely groan of the city's missionary. He was a fugitive in the heart of the Republic, framed for a crime he didn't commit, but as Steve Rogers navigated the shadows, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The lines were finally drawn. The war wasn't in the Outer Rim anymore. It was right here, in the dark, and for the first time since he had arrived in this galaxy, Steve Rogers knew exactly who the enemy was.
Section 5. Level 1313 didn't have a sun, only the artificial glow of neon signs advertising synthetic ale and cut-rate cybernetics. The air here was heavy, recycled 1,000 times over, tasting of copper and despair. Steve Rogers moved through the crowds of hooded figures and low-slung droids with the practiced anonymity of a man who had spent years in the shadows of occupied Europe. He had traded his vibrant blue uniform for a weathered brown duster, the circular bulk of his shield hidden beneath the heavy fabric against his back. He found the coordinates Rex had transmitted, a derelict droid repair shop tucked behind a leaking coolant main. The sign above the door flickered, Vane's specialized slicing. Steve stepped inside. The shop was a chaotic nest of stripped chassis and glowing hollow screens. In the center of the room, Rex stood with his hand hovering near his DC-17, facing a spindly Celestin with oversized goggles perched on his forehead. "He's clean, Captain," Rex said, though his eyes didn't leave the Celestin. Vane used to work for Republic Logistics before he realized the pay was better in the gutters. He's the best slicer on the lower levels. Vane chirped in a rapid-fire dialect of Celestes before switching to accented basic. "You bring much heat, Captain. The red plates are crawling all over the sector. My fee just doubled for the risk of having the Vanguard in my shop." "We're not here to talk prices, Vane," said Steve, his voice dropping into that quiet, authoritative tone that brooked no argument. He stepped into the light, the shadow of his hood falling away. "We need to know about the Kamino and data surge. 3 hours before the explosion in Sector 4, a priority signal was sent from Coruscant to Tipoca City. We need the origin point." Vane grumbled, his jowls quivering, but he turned back to his terminal. "Kamino and encryption is biological, built on DNA sequencing, hard to crack, but the Republic uses a standard backdoor for oversight. Let's see." The Celestian's fingers blurred over the holographic keys. Screens pulsed with lines of Arabesh code. Rex paced the small room, the cramped quarters making the veteran clone visibly twitchy. Steve watched the monitors, his tactical mind processing the flow of information. He knew how bureaucracies worked. Someone always left a footprint. "Found it," Vane whispered, his eyes widening behind his goggles. It wasn't a requisition, it was a firmware update, tagged under Special Order 66, Subprotocol, Behavioral Stabilization. Rex froze. Behavioral stabilization? That's for the newer batches, the ones with the aggression issues. "No," Vane said, pulling up a schematic of a human brain, a clone brain. A small organic mass was highlighted near the frontal lobe. This update went to the entire production line, every active trooper. It was a trigger. It didn't just stabilize behavior, it suppressed specific neural pathways, empathy, free will, long-term memory of personal bonds. Steve leaned in, his heart sinking. Fives. The malfunction they claimed he had? Was it related to this? Vane tapped a few more keys, pulling up a medical file that Rex gasped. It was a scan of ARC Trooper 5's brain from the Kamino and infirmary, taken just after the sabotage. "The chip in this trooper, it triggered early," he explained, "or it was tampered with. It was trying to force a state of total obedience while his conscious mind fought back. The friction caused a psychotic break. The explosion in the lab, it wasn't sabotage. It was a frantic, desperate attempt by the trooper to destroy the facility's master control for these chips before his mind was wiped." The silence in the shop was deafening. Rex staggered back, hitting a workbench. His hand went to his own temple, his fingers trembling against the short-cropped blonde hair. "I have one," Rex whispered, his voice cracking. "We all have one. Every brother I've ever fought beside, we have a remote control in our heads." Steve placed a firm hand on Rex's shoulder. The heat of his anger was cold, a white-hot furnace of resolve. He had seen the horrors of Hydra's human experimentation, the way they turned men into weapons, but this was on a galactic scale. Millions of men, good men like Rex, were walking around with a death switch in their skulls, placed there by the very government they were dying to protect. "We're going to get it out, Rex," said Steve, his voice like iron. "Every one of them."
Captain, Vane interrupted, his voice shaking. I found the origin point of the update. It didn't come from the Senate. It didn't even come from the Republic Military Command. Where did it come from? Steve asked. He pointed to a string of coordinates, a private relay in the industrial sector, owned by a holding company called Darthus Holdings. The signature on the authorization, it's encrypted with a 1024-bit Sith cipher. I've only seen that kind of coding once before, in intercepted separatist transmissions from Count Dooku's inner circle. Steve straightened. The pieces were falling into place, a terrifying mosaic of betrayal. The war wasn't a conflict between two sides, it was a staged play. The Republic and the Separatists were two hands of the same monster, and the clones were the expendable pieces being moved toward a final bloody endgame. They're framing fives to hide the chips, Rex realized. They're using the Vanguard's reputation for independence as a smokescreen. If they can make the galaxy fear free clones, no one will question the need for stabilization. We have to tell the Jedi, Rex said, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. General Skywalker, Master Kenobi, they'll listen, they'll stop this. The Jedi are already under suspicion, Rex, Steve reminded him. Palpatine has them chasing shadows. If we go to the temple now, we might lead the enemy right to them before we have the full proof. We need the physical hardware, a master chip or the original coding from that relay station. Suddenly the shop's perimeter alarm wailed, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the low hum of level 1313. They found us, Vane shrieked, diving under his desk. Outside, the heavy thrum of a low-flying LAAT gunship shook the walls. Searchlights cut through the grimy windows, sweeping over the stripped droid parts. Thermal detonator, Steve yelled, grabbing Rex and diving behind a heavy durasteel welding table. Boom! The front of the shop vanished in a fireball of orange and black. Debris whistled through the air. As the smoke cleared, red searchlights illuminated the breach. Go, 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 a metallic voice commanded. Shock troopers in red-marked armor swarmed through the opening, their blasters set to stun, their movements precise and lethal. But leading them wasn't Commander Fox. It was a figure in dark, streamlined armor, wielding a rotating double-blade spinning hilt that hummered with a sinister, crimson energy. An Inquisitor, the Chancellor's secret hunter. Steve unslung his shield, the vibranium catching the flickering neon light. Rex, get the datapad and Vane out through the back, commanded Steve, stepping into the path of the advancing troopers. I'll hold the line. Captain, there's too many, Rex shouted, grabbing the terrified Celestin. Steve didn't look back. He planted his feet, the shield raised, his blue eyes locked on the red blade of the Inquisitor. I told you, Steve said, his voice echoing through the ruined shop. I can do this all day.
The crimson blade of the Inquisitor ignited with a malevolent hiss, casting a bloody glare over the twisted metal of Vane's shop. This wasn't the refined, elegant lightsaber combat of Obi-Wan Kenobi or the raw, kinetic power of Anakin Skywalker. This was something darker, a jagged, hungry energy that seemed to swallow the flickering neon light of level 1313. The Chancellor warned us of your resilience, Rogers, the figure said, their voice muffled by a sleek, featureless black mask. A relic of a dead world trying to save a dead republic. You are a ghost fighting a tide. Steve Rogers didn't answer. He didn't need to. He shifted his weight, his boots crunching on the glass of the shattered storefront. He felt the cold air of the lower levels rushing into the heated shop, carrying the smell of ozone and wet carbon. Behind him, he heard Rex dragging a whimpering Vane toward the ventilation shaft in the rear. Go, Rex, Steve commanded, his eyes never leaving the red blade. Target identified. Open fire, Commander Fox's voice echoed through the breach. The shock troopers didn't hesitate. A volley of blue stun rings erupted from the smoke. Steve reacted with a speed that made the Inquisitor's head tilt in curiosity. He didn't just hide behind the shield, he moved with it, a spinning dervish of vibranium and muscle. He intercepted 3 bolts, the shield absorbing the concussive energy with a low, metallic thrum, and used the momentum to hurl a heavy droid chassis at the advancing clones. The chassis struck the ground in front of the troopers, forcing them to scatter. In that heartbeat of distraction, the Inquisitor lunged. The red blade spun, a literal circle of death as the hilt's secondary ring engaged. Steve ducked, the heat of the plasma singing the fabric of his duster. He came up with a shield bash aimed at the Inquisitor's midsection, but the Dark Hunter was already gone, propelled upward by the Force. Steve looked up just as the Inquisitor landed on a hanging cargo rail, the red blade illuminating the ceiling. You fight with the desperation of a man who thinks he can win, the Inquisitor mocked, the spinning blade casting hypnotic shadows. But you are outmatched, Captain. I have the power of the galaxy behind me. You have only a piece of metal. It's not just metal,
Steve said, his voice level. "It's a reminder that some things don't break." Steve unslung his shield and threw it. It didn't go for the Inquisitor. It struck a structural support beam for the cargo rail. The vibranium hit with the force of a wrecking ball, the structural integrity of the aging level 1313 giving way instantly. The rail groaned, snapped, and plummeted. The Inquisitor leaped clear, a graceful arc of black armor, but the distraction was enough. Steve was already in motion. He didn't go for the Inquisitor. He went for the shock troopers. He didn't want to kill them. Even now, with their rifles leveled at his heart, they were Rex's brothers. They were the men he had sworn to protect. Steve closed the distance in 3 strides, a blur of blue and brown. He struck Fox's rifle with the edge of the shield, shearing the barrel off, and followed up with a precise strike to the nerve cluster in the commander's shoulder. Fox's arm went limp, the trooper staggering back. "Rogers, stop," Fox grunted, reaching for his sidearm with his offhand. "You're a traitor to the Republic. The Republic isn't who's giving you these orders," Fox shouted over the din of blaster fire. Steve spun, the shield catching a flurry of stun bolts, and then he felt it, a cold, invisible pressure slamming into his chest. He was thrown backward, his boots skidding across the metal floor. He hit the back wall of the shop with enough force to dent the plating. The Inquisitive stood in the center of the room, hand outstretched, the force radiating from them in palpable waves of malice. "Enough games," the Inquisitor hissed. The Dark Hunter raised their red blade and charged, a blur of predatory speed. Steve scrambled up, the shield raised just in time. Crack, hiss. The lightsaber slammed into the star. The vibranium hummed, a high-pitched, agonizing whistle that made the troopers wince. The Inquisitor leaned into the strike, the red plasma spitting sparks as it ground against the alloy. Steve's muscles strained, the super soldier serum pushed to its absolute limit. His boots began to slide back, carving ruts in the floor. "Your strength is impressive," the Inquisitor whispered, their masked face inches from Steve's, "but it is finite." The dark
side is eternal. The Inquisitor's voice was a cold rasp behind the mask, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. The red blade pressed harder, the heat beginning to singe Steve's duster, but the vibranium remained a cold, impassive wall between life and death. Steve's jaw was set, his teeth grinding as he channeled every ounce of the super soldier serum's power into his lead arm. "I've heard that before," Steve grunted, his voice a low growl of defiance. "Usually from people who ended up in the dirt." Steve didn't just push back, he redirected. With a sudden, sharp twist of his torso, he angled the shield, letting the red blade slide off the rounded edge. The Inquisitor, caught by their own momentum, stumbled a fraction of a second. It was all the window Steve needed. He lunged forward, not with the shield, but with a lightning-fast lead hook that caught the Inquisitor square in the chest. The Dark Hunter was thrown back, their armor clattering against a stack of discarded astromech chassis. Before they could recover, Steve grabbed a heavy magnetic grappling line from a nearby workbench and hurled it at a series of overhead power conduits. "Fox, get your men out of here!" Steve roared, even as he pulled the cable taut. "Don't take orders from him," Fox shouted, his voice strained as he struggled to reset his scorched rifle. "Concentrate fire on the—" Steve yanked the cable. The power conduits tore free from the ceiling in a shower of blue sparks and molten copper. High-voltage electricity arced through the damp air of the shop, striking the metal floor on the piles of droid parts. The shock troopers scrambled back, their HUDs flickering and shorting out from the electromagnetic surge. The Inquisitor rose from the wreckage, their red blades spinning again, but they were slower now, their movements hampered by the chaotic energy in the room. "You think a few sparks can stop a servant of the dark?" the Inquisitor hissed, raising their free hand. A wave of force energy rippled through the room, crushing the sparking conduits into scrap metal. "No," said Steve, his hand already reaching for a canister of pressurized coolant on the floor. He kicked the canister toward the Inquisitor and followed it with a precise throw of his shield. The vibranium struck the valve of the canister mid-air. A cloud of supercooled liquid nitrogen erupted directly in the Inquisitor's path. The Dark Hunter vanished in a fog of white vapor. The metal floor beneath them became instantly brittle, the air turning into a frozen tomb. The Inquisitor let out a muffled cry of rage as the extreme cold seized their mechanical joints and froze the moisture on their mask. Steve didn't wait to see the result. He turned and sprinted towards the rear of the shop, where Rex had disappeared. He vaulted over the back counter, sliding into the narrow ventilation shaft, just as the Inquisitor's red blade sliced through the freezing fog, carving a molten path through the durasteel walls.
The ventilation shaft was a cramped, echoing tunnel of rusted iron that smelled of ancient dust and ozone. Steve moved through it with a predatory speed, his shield clattering softly against his back. He emerged 2 levels down in a maintenance corridor that hummed with the steady vibration of level 1313's waste processing plants. "Rex, Vane," Steve called, his voice hushed. "Over here, Captain." Rex's voice came from the shadows behind a massive heat exchanger. He stepped out, his gray cloak tattered, his DC-17s raised. Behind him, Vane was huddled in a corner, clutching a portable data pad as if it were a holy relic. "Are you all right?" Steve asked, checking the corridor for pursuit. "We're clear for now," Rex said, his eyes scanning the ceiling. "But that thing, Captain, that wasn't a Jedi. It was like something out of a nightmare." "It's an Inquisitor," Steve said, the name tasting like ash. "The Chancellor's secret police. If Palpatine is using them, he's not just trying to arrest us, he's trying to erase us." "They'll be tracking Vane's data pad," the Celestin squeaked, his goggles crooked. "I've scrambled the signature, but they have the entire sector locked down. We can't get back to the ship." Steve looked at the data pad. "We don't need the ship yet. Vane, that relay point, the Sith relay, where is it?" Vane pointed to a flashing red dot on a schematic of the industrial sector. "It's on level 5000, an old communications spire, officially decommissioned after the Battle of Coruscant. It's a dead zone, no civilian traffic, no sensors. If the update came from there, it's being broadcast on a private frequency." "Then that's where we're going." "Sir," Rex interrupted, his voice heavy with doubt. "We're 2 men and a slicer against the entire Coruscant Guard and whatever that dark blade was. If we go to that spire, we're walking into a trap." Steve looked at Rex. He saw the fear in the clone's eyes, not for himself, but for the brothers he was leaving behind. He saw the star and stripes on Rex's shoulder, now smeared with the grime of the underworld. "Rex, back in my world, I fought a group called Hydra. They believed that humanity couldn't be trusted with its own freedom. They tried to build a world where everyone was a soldier in a machine they didn't understand. They used fear, and they used secrets. But the thing about secrets is that they only work in the dark. Once you shine a light on them, the machine starts to rust." He placed a hand on Rex's shoulder, his grip firm. "This inhibitor chip is the heart of Palpatine's machine. It's the leash he's going to use to turn the clones into a weapon against the Jedi and the Republic. If we get the code from that relay, we can show the Council, we can show the men, we can give them their choice back." Rex took a deep breath, his chest plate rising and falling. He looked at the data pad, then back at Steve. The doubt didn't vanish, but it was replaced by a grim soldier's resolve. "My brothers deserve better than a kill switch. Lead the way, Captain." They moved through the subterranean labyrinth of Coruscant, avoiding the main thoroughfares where the red searchlights of the Guard patrolled. Steve led them with an instinctive sense of direction, his tactical mind mapping the layers of the city. He wasn't just thinking about the spire, he was thinking about the Inquisitor. He knew they were still out there, sensing them through whatever dark power they possessed. As they climbed through a series of abandoned cargo elevators toward level 5000, the atmosphere changed. The neon lights of level 1313 faded, replaced by the cold blue glow of high-altitude clouds and the distant rhythmic strobing of orbital defense platforms. Level 5000 was a graveyard of industrial ambition, skeletal towers of durasteel and glass that had been abandoned when the war shifted the city's focus. They reached the spire's base, a massive circular platform that hung over a mile-deep chasm. In the center of the platform stood a needle-thin tower, its surface covered in jagged, obsidian-colored sensor arrays that looked like thorns. "There it is," Vane whispered, "the Darthus relay." "Stay sharp," Steve warned, unslung his shield. "They know we're coming." They stepped onto the platform. The wind here was fierce, whistling through the gaps in the spire like a mourning cry. The sky above was a bruised purple, the lights of the Senate district a cruel, distant glitter. Suddenly, the air pressure dropped. Steve felt a prickle on the back of his neck. "Behind me!" Steve shouted. He threw the shield in a wide, sweeping arc. It struck the air 10 feet away, and for a second, the vibranium seemed to ripple against an invisible wall. The shield bounced back to Steve, and the air shimmered, revealing the Inquisitor standing at the edge of the platform. But they weren't alone. 4 figures in streamlined silver and black armor stepped out of the shadows. They weren't clones. They were droids, but unlike any droids Steve had seen, they were humanoid, their movements fluid and silent, their hands replaced with vibrating stun prods and built-in blaster arrays. Imperial prototypes, Steve's mind whispered. "You are persistent, Rogers, but you have reached the end of your journey. The truth you seek is here, but you will not live to carry it." The Inquisitor raised their hand, and the 4 prototype droids lunged forward, their blasters opening fire with a high-pitched electronic scream. Steve planted his feet, the shield raised, the star glowing in the twilight. "Rex, get Vane to the terminal. I'll take the front." The Battle of the Spire had begun.
Relay! Steve looked up. The jagged thorns of the tower were beginning to glow with a sickly, rhythmic crimson light. A deep subsonic hum vibrated through the platform, so intense it made Steve's teeth ache. "It's an uplink!" Vane shrieked, his large eyes wide with terror. "It's not just sending the update to Kamino, it's broadcasting a live signal to every cruiser in the sector. It's a test fire for the inhibitor chips." "Shut it down," Steve commanded. "I can't." Vane's fingers were shaking. "The broadcast is slave to a biometric signature. It needs a high-level Republic clearance or the source key." The Inquisitor laughed, a hollow, mechanical sound. "The source key is the Chancellor's will, Rogers. You are trying to stop the tide with a bucket." The Dark Hunter surged forward, the red blades spinning into a blur. Steve met the attack head-on, the vibranium clashing against the plasma with a shower of sparks. The Inquisitor was fighting with a renewed ferocity, their strikes fueled by the dark energy pulsing from the tower. "You speak for the Chancellor," Steve grunted, his arm straining against the red blade. "But I speak for the men who have to live with his will. They aren't your playtouse." Steve kicked out, his boot catching the Inquisitor's hilt and tilting the blade just enough to create an opening. He followed with a heavy headbutt that rang against the Inquisitor's mask, then a shield bash that sent the Dark Hunter skidding across the rain-slicked platform. "Rex, the broadcast!" Steve pointed to the primary transmitter array 20 feet up the tower's side. "I see it," Rex said. He looked at the prototype droids, then at the tower. He knew he couldn't climb it fast enough, and he couldn't shoot through the armored casing. He looked at Steve. "Captain, the shield!" Steve understood instantly. It was a move they had practiced in the training rooms of the Resolute, a movement Steve had used with a different partner in a different life. Steve sprinted toward Rex. The 2 silver droids closed in from the flanks, their blasters synchronized. Steve didn't slow down. He held the shield flat, parallel to the ground. "Now!" Steve roared. Rex leapt, his boots hitting the center of the vibranium star. Steve heaved upward with every ounce of super soldier strength, his leg muscles bunching as he launched the clone captain into the air. Rex soared, a blue and gray arc against the bruised sky. He caught a protruding sensor thorn 15 feet up, swinging himself onto the transmitter's cooling manifold. "Get down from there!" the Inquisitor screamed, reaching out with their hand to seize Rex with the Force. "Not today," Steve lunged, throwing himself into the Inquisitor's path. He didn't use the shield. He tackled the Inquisitor around the waist, the 2 of them crashing into a stack of heavy cargo crates. Up on the tower, Rex pulled a heavy ion grenade from his belt. He looked down at the platform, at the droids closing in on Steve, at the red light of the spire. He thought of 5s. He thought of the thousands of brothers who didn't even know they were being enslaved. "This is for the Vanguard," Rex whispered. He jammed the grenade into the transmitter's cooling intake and kicked off, falling backward into the wind. Thoom! The ion explosion was a beautiful, blinding blue flower of energy. The red light of the spire flickered and died. The electromagnetic pulse rippled across the platform. The 2 prototype droids froze mid-step, their silver plating sparking before they collapsed into a heap of inert metal. The Inquisitor let out a howl of agony, their connection to the tower's dark resonance severed. They shoved Steve away, their mask cracked, revealing a single burning yellow eye. "You have no idea what you've done," the Inquisitor wheezed, the red blade flickering and fading as the lightsaber's power cell shorted. Steve stood up, his duster torn, his shield scratched, but his eyes were steady. He watched Rex land hard on the platform, the clone captain rolling and coming up with his blasters ready. "I know exactly what we've done," Steve said, clipping his shield to his back. "We've stopped the test. And Vane?" The Celestin held up the portable datapad, a triumphant grin on his face. "I got it, Captain. The master code, the Sith cipher, and the authorization logs from Darthus Holdings. It's all here. The whole conspiracy." The Inquisitor looked from the datapad to the sky. In the distance, the red lights of a dozen Coruscant Guard gunships were closing in, their sirens wailing. "You have the truth," the Inquisitor whispered, a chilling smile touching their lips. "But truth is a heavy burden, Rogers. Let's see if the Republic can survive the weight of it." The Dark Hunter threw a smoke pellet at their feet, and by the time the gray mist cleared, they were gone, vanished into the shadows of the chasm. "Captain," Rex said as he walked over to Steve, his breathing heavy. "The guard is almost here. We need to go." Steve looked at the datapad, then at the red lights of the incoming hunters. He felt the weight of the data, the secret that would shatter the galaxy. "We're not running anymore, Rex," Steve said, clipping his shield to his back. "We're going to the one place they can't ignore us." "Where?" "The Jedi Temple."
The golden spires of the Jedi Temple pierced the swirling, toxic clouds of Coruscant like the fingers of a drowning god. Usually a beacon of serenity, the temple was now a fortress under siege. Searchlights from dozens of Republic gunships crisscrossed the massive stone facade, and the great stairs were choked with the white and red armor of the Coruscant Guard. Steve Rogers gripped the steering vanes of the stolen civilian speeder, pushing the repulsors to their red line. Behind him, Rex checked the power cells on his dual DC-17s, his face a mask of grim determination. Vane, the Celestin slicer, was curled into a ball on the floorboards, clutching the datapad containing the Sith cipher as if it were a thermal detonator. "They've locked down the airspace," Rex shouted over the roar of the wind. "Captain, if we cross that perimeter, they'll blow us out of the sky." "Hang on," Steve yelled back. He didn't slow down. Instead, he banked the speeder into a vertical climb, skimming the side of a neighboring skyscraper before cutting the engines entirely. The speeder groaned, momentum carrying them into a silent, ballistic arc over the heads of the blockade. At the apex of the curve, Steve kicked the side door open. "Jump!" They plummeted. Steve unslung his shield mid-air, holding it beneath him like a grav plate. They crashed through the stained glass skylight of the temple's Room of 1,000 Fountains, a shower of crystalline shards raining down into the tranquil pools below. Steve landed in a rolling crouch, the vibranium absorbing the lethal kinetic energy of the fall. Rex and Vane hit the mossy ground a second later, their jump boots hissing as they bled off the impact. The serenity of the fountain room was shattered instantly. Temple guards, their yellow lightsaber pikes igniting, emerged from the shadows of the oversized ferns. "Halt!" the lead guard commanded, his voice a distorted chime behind his mask. "You are under arrest for treason against the Republic." "We're not here to fight you," Steve shouted, raising his shield but keeping his stance defensive. "We have evidence of a conspiracy within the Senate. We need to see Master Yoda or Obi-Wan Kenobi." "The Council has issued a warrant for your immediate detention, Rogers," a voice boomed from the far end of the hall. Steve froze. Stepping out from behind a massive stone pillar was Anakin Skywalker. His blue lightsaber was already ignited, the hum of the blade echoing off the high ceilings. Beside him stood Commander Fox in a squad of shock troopers, their rifles leveled. "General, listen to me," Steve said, his voice steady. "The Kaminoans didn't just sabotage the labs. They've implanted biochips in every clone. It's a remote control, Anakin, a kill switch for their free will." Anakin's eyes flickered with a brief, agonizing doubt, but then his jaw set. "Palpatine told you'd say that, Steve. He said you'd turn the army against the Republic to save your own skin. You're a soldier. You know how this works. You don't get to choose which orders to follow."
That's exactly the problem, Steve barked. A soldier without a choice is just a machine. Look at Rex. Look at your men. Do you really think they'd commit the crimes they're being framed for? I saw the footage on Kamino, Anakin roared, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, the blue lightsaber a blur of predatory speed. Steve met the strike with his shield. The collision sent a shockwave through the room, ripples dancing across the surface of the fountains. This wasn't the sparring match they'd had in the mud months ago. This was a battle for the soul of the war. Anakin fought with a desperate, reckless fury, his strikes fueled by the betrayal he felt. Steve moved with the fluidity of a master tactician, using the shield to parry and redirect Anakin's power. He didn't strike back with the edge. He used the flat of the vibranium to shove Anakin away, trying to create space. Rex, Vane, get to the archives, Steve commanded. Upload the data to the Council's private frequency. Go. Rex didn't hesitate. He grabbed Vane and sprinted towards the back exits, his blasters firing non-lethal stun rounds at the approaching shock troopers. Fox and his men scrambled for cover. The hall erupted in a chaotic crossfire of blue rings and red plasma. "You're not going anywhere," Anakin snarled, leaping over Steve's head to intercept Rex. Steve anticipated the move. He threw the shield. The disc blurred through the air, banking off a stone fountain and a hanging vine before striking the hilt of Anakin's lightsaber. The impact didn't break the weapon, but it jarred Anakin's grip just enough to send his strike wide. Steve was already there, tackling Anakin around the waist and driving him into a shallow pool. They grappled in the water, a storm of white foam and blue light. "I don't want to hurt you, Anakin," Steve grunted, his fingers locking around Anakin's mechanical wrist. "Then surrender." Anakin shoved Steve back with a burst of force energy. Steve skidded across the wet tiles, his shield snapping back to his arm. He looked up to see Fox and his troopers closing in on Rex and Vane. The slicer was frantically trying to slice the heavy blast doors leading to the archives. "Anakin, look at the code," Steve shouted, pointing to the datapad in Vane's hand. "It's a Sith cipher. Why would the Republic use a Sith cipher for an update?" Anakin paused, his chest heaving. For a second, the silence in the room was absolute. He looked at Rex, the man who had served him faithfully for years, and he saw the absolute unwavering trust the clone had in the captain. He felt the force swirling around Steve Rogers, and for the first time, he noticed the density of it. Steve wasn't force-sensitive, but he was a fixed point of absolute morality in a galaxy that had gone gray. "Anakin, please," Steve said softly. "Just look." Anakin lowered his blade an inch. "General, don't listen to him," Fox yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle. "He's a separatist plant. Open fire." Fox didn't wait for Anakin's command. He fired a lethal red bolt directly at Vane. Steve moved faster than human thought. He lunged in front of the Sullustan, the shield raised. The bolt struck the star and dissipated. But Fox wasn't alone. The entire squad opened fire, a wall of red plasma meant to kill, not capture. "Stop!" Anakin screamed, his hand outstretched. He used the force to freeze the bolts in mid-air, a shimmering field of suspended energy. His face was contorted with the effort, the raw power of the Chosen One on full display. He looked at Fox, then at Steve. "The captain stays with me," Anakin panted, his eyes glowing with a dangerous intensity. "Fox, stand down. That's an order." "My orders come from the Chancellor, General, and the Chancellor says Rogers is to be eliminated on sight." Fox raised his hand to signal a second volley. In that moment, Steve saw the future. He saw Fox, a good soldier, being puppeted by a hidden hand. He saw the stability Palpatine promised as what it was, a cage. "Vane, now!" Steve roared. The blast doors hissed open. Rex shoved Vane inside and turned, his dual pistols raised. "I'm sorry, Fox," Rex said, his voice thick with grief, "but I'm done taking orders from ghosts." Rex fired, not at the troopers, but at the control panel of the skylight. A massive, heavy Durasteel shutter slammed shut, sealing the fountain room from the rest of the temple and cutting off the Coruscant guards' reinforcements. But they were trapped inside, with Anakin and with the truth. Uploaded vein, Steve said, his eyes on the data pad. Show him what's in their heads. The Sullustan plugged the pad into a maintenance terminal. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room. It wasn't a military map or a tactical report. It was a schematic of a clone's brain and a string of code that began with the words Special Order 66. In the event of Jedi treason, the clones shall... Anakin's lightsaber deactivated. The hum died, leaving only the sound of the falling fountains. He stared at the glowing Arabesh. He felt the Force scream a warning, a cold, sickening realization that the man he called his mentor was the architect of his brother's destruction. "It's real," Anakin whispered. "It's real," Steve confirmed, stepping to his side. But even as the truth was revealed, the temple shook. A massive explosion rocked the foundations. The Inquisitor had returned, and they hadn't come alone. The Shadow Cabinet had authorized a full orbital bombardment of the temple sector. The final battle for the Republic had begun.
Section 10. The ceiling of the Room of 1,000 Fountains groaned, a deep, structural shriek that drowned out the trickling water. Dust and fine stone powder rained down like gray snow, coating the vibrant green ferns and the blue surface of the pools. Outside, the sky was no longer purple. It was a bruised, hellish orange, lit by the atmospheric friction of orbital kinetic strikes hitting the surrounding industrial sectors. Palpatine wasn't just hunting a fugitive anymore. He was cauterizing a wound. "The signal is live," Vane shrieked, his fingers dancing over the terminal as the temple shook again. "I've bypassed the temple's internal relay. It's broadcasting on every emergency frequency, military, civilian, and Jedi. The data on the Sith cipher, the Darthus Holdings link, and the schematic for Order 66. It's out there. It's hitting the HoloNet." Steve Rogers stood at the center of the room, his shield held high as a massive chunk of the vaulted ceiling plummeted toward them. He caught the stone on the vibranium star, the impact vibrating through his boots and cracking the floor tiles beneath him. With a grunt of exertion, he heaved the ton of rubble aside. "Anakin, Rex, we need to move," Steve shouted. Anakin Skywalker stood as if carved from ice, his gaze fixed on the holographic brain scan. The betrayal was a physical weight, a cold poison that seemed to dim the very light of his spirit. He had called Palpatine a mentor, a father. He had nearly killed his friend for a lie. "General," Rex ground Anakin's shoulder, his voice urgent. "The guard is breaching the lower levels. We have to go now." Fox and his shock troopers were still in the room, huddled behind a decorative stone wall. They were frozen, their blasters lowered. The broadcast had hit their internal HUDs too. For the first time, the clones of the Coruscant Guard were seeing the blueprints of their own minds. They were seeing the leash. "Fox," Steve said, walking toward the commander. He didn't raise his shield. He looked at the man behind the red mask. "You saw it. You know I'm not the enemy. He's been using you to kill your own future." Fox's helmet tilted, his breathing heavy and mechanical over the comms. It's a directive. Order 66. It says the Jedi are..." "The Jedi are your brothers in arms," interrupted Steve. "And you are a man, Fox, not a directive. You have a choice. Right now, you can help us save this republic, or you can let it burn in the dark." Fox looked at Anakin, then at the smoking ruins of the temple skylight. A long, agonizing silence followed, punctuated only by the distant boom of artillery. Slowly, Fox holstered his blaster. "Squad, stand down," Fox ordered, his voice cracking. "Protect the transmission, defensive perimeter around the slicer." The red armored clones moved instantly, but not to arrest. They fanned out, creating a wall of white and red between the terminal and the main entrance. It was a small victory, but to Steve, it felt like the first real sunrise of the war. Crash. The heavy blast doors at the far end of the hall didn't just open, they were liquefied. A wave of molten metal splashed across the floor as the Inquisitors stepped through the ruins, their red blades spinning with a rhythmic, hypnotic hum. Behind them marched a dozen more of the silver and black Dark Trooper prototypes, their blasters already whining as they primed for a full-power volley. "The broadcast was a mistake, Rogers," the Inquisitor hissed, the black mask cracked to reveal a face twisted by dark-side corruption. "You have alerted the galaxy, yes, but you have also identified every Vanguard sympathizer for immediate termination. You haven't started a revolution, you've started a purge." "Then we'll just have to finish it," Steve said. He didn't look at the Inquisitor, he looked at Anakin. "Together?" Anakin's blue blade ignited with a snap hiss that sounded like a thunderclap. The hollow look in his eyes was replaced by a cold, focused fury, the righteous anger of a man who had finally seen the monster in the room.
Together, Anakin said. The two legends moved as one. Steve led the charge, the shield held forward to catch the brunt of the Dark Troopers' fire. The silver droids let loose a torrent of blue plasma, but Steve didn't just block. He angled the shield, reflecting the bolts back into the droid's sensory arrays. Anakin moved like a blur of blue light, leaping over Steve's shoulder. He didn't use the Force for subtle tricks. He used it to seize a massive stone statue of a Jedi Master and hurl it into the center of the droid line. As the droids were crushed, Anakin descended, his lightsaber carving through their silver plating like a hot knife through butter. The Inquisitor lunged for Vane, their red blade a circle of crimson death. Steve anticipated the strike. He didn't throw the shield, he jammed it into the center of the spinning hilt. Screech! The vibranium didn't cut the blade, but the harmonic vibration of the impact shattered the Inquisitor's mechanical emitter. The red blade flickered and died. Steve followed through with a brutal spinning back kick that sent the Inquisitor flying across the fountain room and into a deep, mossy pool. "Rex, Fox, fall back to the hangars," commanded Steve. "We've done what we came for. The truth is out." "We're not leaving you, sir," Rex shouted, his dual pistols barking as he and Fox's squad held the line against a second wave of droids entering from the gardens. "That's not an order, Rex. It's a request," yelled Steve, grabbing a thermal detonator from a fallen droid's belt. "Get Vane and that data pad to the Council. If the Jedi know the chips are real, they can stop the triggers." Anakin landed beside Steve, his cloak tattered, his face smudged with soot. "He's right, Rex. Go. I'll cover the captain." Rex hesitated for one heartbeat, then nodded. He grabbed Vane, and the red and blue combined squad began a fighting retreat toward the lower hangars. Steve and Anakin stood back to back in the center of the burning fountain room. The temple was crumbling around them, and the shadows were closing in. More dark troopers were entering the hall, and through the shadowed skylight they could see the silhouettes of more gunships descending. "You know we're probably not walking out of this one," Anakin said, his voice strangely calm. Steve adjusted the straps on his shield, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the Senate building loomed like a dark mountain. "I've been in tighter spots," Steve said. "Besides, I think we just gave the galaxy something it hasn't had in a long time." "What's that?" "A chance." He raised his shield, Anakin raised his saber. As the first of the new hunters stepped into the light, the captain and the Jedi charged together, a blue blur and a silver star against the encroaching night. Word count, 1092. Conclusion. The transmission from the Jedi Temple did not end the Clone Wars, but it fractured the reality Palpatine had so carefully constructed. Across the galaxy, Jedi generals and clone commanders watched the data, the proof of the Sith Psyker, the reality of the inhibitor chips, and the sinister intent of Special Order 66. The Rogers effect had evolved from a tactical shift into a full-scale crisis of conscience for the Grand Army of the Republic. While many clones remained loyal to the Chancellor out of ingrained programming, thousands more followed the 501st's lead, painting stars on their armor and questioning the shadows in their minds. Captain Steve Rogers and Anakin Skywalker had survived the assault on the temple, vanishing into the underworld of Coruscant along with Rex and the Vanguard. They were now the most wanted fugitives in the galaxy, branded as terrorists by a Senate increasingly under the thumb of a Chancellor who had declared martial law to stabilize the Republic. But the secret was out. The Jedi Council was in open dissent, and the clones were no longer a unified, obedient weapon. The book had been reset. Captain America had shown the galaxy that even in a war of millions, a single choice can break a chain. As the Empire began to rise from the ashes of the Republic, it faced an enemy it had never anticipated, a rebellion led not just by Force wielders, but by men who had finally learned the meaning of their own names. The war for the soul of the galaxy had truly begun. May the Force be with you. More stories await.